Jamal Khashoggi hangs over the upcoming G20 meeting, which takes place later this week in Argentina. And guess what? The Saudis are members of the G20. So should Justin Trudeau confront Saudi Arabia's crown prince, who's widely believed to have ordered that killing while he's there. But that's not the only controversy that could unravel this meeting. There's also a trade war between the United States and China. Is Donald Trump intent on undermining these international alliances? Well, the former Prime Minister of Canada and the architect of the G20, Paul Martin, joins us now to find out. He's in Montreal. Mr. Martin, always a pleasure to have you on the program. I want to talk about the G20, and you've always said Canada needs to take a leadership role in the G20. One of the key questions facing it, of course, is what to do about Saudi Arabia and how to confront Saudi Arabia over the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Donald Trump, the U.S. president, refuses to condemn Saudi Arabia over that murder. He won't even say unequivocally that they had anything to do with it. Does Donald Trump undermine the moral authority of the West and the G20 with his position vis-a-vis Khashoggi?
Well, I don't think that he'll undermine the G20. I think he's certainly in the process of undermining his own position. There's no doubt that there will be a discussion of this. Saudi Arabia is a member, and it will be there. That being said, Evan, I think that the elephant in the room is clearly going to be the U.S.-China trade war. The effect of that on the global economy is affecting every single member at that table, and there's not much doubt in my mind that what they hope will come out of this will be a truce between China and the United States on which they can start to build what has to be done. So Saudi Arabia, absolutely, but I really believe the number one issue is going to be the U.S.-China trade war.
Let me move to U.S.-China and that trade war, because you're absolutely right. It's vital to the Canadian economy as well. But let me just, one more question on the Khashoggi file, because it makes international headlines. I'm trying to understand, in your view, what Donald Trump, the U.S.'s role, which lends moral authority to the G20 to enforce international norms, Mr. Martin. That was the point of the very organization that you talked about. Is Donald Trump undermining that, and does Canada now have to respond by, say, I don't know, not selling any weapons to Saudi Arabia in order to show that those norms can be meaningfully enforced?
Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the fact is that G20 was built upon the need for multilateralism, the need for the world's major economies and major regional economies to work together to have inclusive growth and to essentially deal with global issues on a global basis. Now, the United States unilateralism manifest in so many of these areas is obviously runs against this. And that what I would hope will happen here at this G20 is that, in fact, that we can begin to rebuild back to the kinds of actions that I believe individual countries have to take as a whole.
Yeah, I don't know how people deal with Donald Trump. That's something that's going to have to happen here. You talk about the growing U.S.-China trade war. How dangerous is that, not only to the growth in the global economy, but specifically to Canada?
Well, I believe that we can handle it. And what obviously makes it important is that we continue to build on the very successful European agreement, the very, very successful agreement we have done with Asia, and we really take a very strong Asian stance. As long as what we are doing as a country is building for the future, when for instance, I think that the fiscal update in which Bill Morneau said this is what we're going to do to build the economy, Canadian economy going ahead, is the kind of thing that we have to do. And one of the things I'm sure you're going to see at the G20 is a number of other countries are going to follow in Canada's lead there.
In 1998, you tabled your first balanced budget. 1998, 20 years ago this year, this finance minister had increased revenues, and he's blowing through his own promise, $10 billion deficits, now moving to $20 billion deficits with no plan to go to balance. I just wonder, this seems totally off the Paul Martin brand. Are you worried about the fact that they increasingly refuse to have any plan to find a balance to the budget?
That's not at all what they're doing. They're saying they are going towards, they are building towards a balanced budget. They can't tell you when it's going to happen, and the reason they can't tell you why it's going to happen is that, in fact, what's happening with the United States is we've just described, and the need for Canada to take action on its own to make sure that we don't suffer because of what the United States is doing, and we've got to build towards it. But the other thing that we've got to understand is that it isn't only what's going on in the United States. Bill Morneau inherited a long series of deficits. And if you take a look at the Harper record, it's a bit, and I don't want to play politics here, Evan, but it's a bit rich for the Conservatives to be talking about liberal deficits when, in fact, they took annual surpluses, a dropping debt ratio, and in fact what they did is they turned them into an annual series over their whole regime of deficits and decreasing or increasing debt ratios.
Right. To be fair, they were responding to the worst financial crisis since the Great Recession, and it was stimulus economic practice that actually the Liberals endorsed. And to be fair, they brought back to a balanced budget when they left. But let me just respond to one more thing you said, Mr. Martin, because you talk about the destabilizing forces of a China-U.S. trade war, but also the low price in oil. How should Canada respond to the historic lows in the price of oil? We're absolutely getting creamed on the fact that we have to sell at a massive discount our oil. How should Canada respond to that?
Well, Canada can only respond by dealing with the tools that it has. Are we pipeline short? Yes, we are. One of the reasons that we're pipeline short, and we saw that in the recent court decision, was that, in fact, we took consultation for granted. That was something that arose before the Liberals took office. And the Liberals have got to solve that issue. It's very clear in terms of our working with the First Nations. There has to be far better working together. And I believe that what we're now seeing is that foundation being laid.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big, you've been an advocate for much more consultation with Canada's First Nations and Indigenous peoples. By the same token, many people say, okay, but we can't get a pipeline built. So how do you square the circle with historic lows, job losses, literally billions of dollars lost, and the fact that these consultations, either A, they go on for a long time, and B, they may kill the pipeline because of that?
Well, first of all, as you know, there's a very large body of thought within the Indigenous community that wants the pipeline. What they're saying is we just want a sound environmental assessment, one that takes place what happens with pipelines on the ground and what happens once it's loaded into ships and they're on their way. And that assessment, the courts have said, was not sufficient. That has been something that's been built in there for a number of years. The Liberals are now trying to deal with it. We're talking a lot of politics here. I think the government is doing the right thing. I think that what they have done in terms of building ahead, giving business the chance to in fact have larger capital cost allowances and build with a future is the kind of thing that we have to do.
Paul Martin, former Prime Minister of Canada. Always great to have you on the program, so appreciate it.
Evan, whenever you want.